Welcome to the Actual News, the interview. Today's special guest is Carl Larson, who is UDS co-founder and former Ukrainian soldier. Carl Larson is a U.S. Army veteran who also served in the International Legion of Ukraine. He spent several months at the front lines in eastern Ukraine. Carl was born and raised in the greater Seattle area, had a stint in U.S. Army where he served in Iraq, and in his day job services a large accounting website. In early March of 2022, he felt compelled to travel to Ukraine to physically join the Ukrainian defense of their homeland. Despite having no prior connection to Ukraine, he feels that it's the world's obligation to help the Ukrainians defend democracy there and contain the spread of ruthless authoritarianism before it engulfs other peaceful countries. In today's interview, we will discuss what happened in Ukraine, what is happening in Ukraine, and what Carl anticipates to happen soon given the change in the U.S. administration. Also, we will talk about those weird drones over New York and New Jersey. So please join us, get ready, and welcome Carl Larson. Hello, Carl. Thank you so much for joining me today. I was so excited to talk to you, and finally you're here.
It's great to be here, Olga. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we had such a wonderful pre-chat, so to speak. And I know I spoke about you so many times on socials and my live streams. So for everybody who was highly anticipating to learn from Carl Larson, he's here. That is him. That's the day you were waiting for. And I know as many heroes, you don't like hearing a thank you, but I want to thank you for everything you did, you're doing, and I'm sure you will continue doing for Ukraine, but also for the world. And we will talk about the point of helping the world through Ukraine. So thank you, first and foremost.
Of course, it was my privilege and frankly, my honor.
And I know you're dressed in a very official way. Can you explain why? And also, let's connect it to your personal why to go to Ukraine, to join the fight, and to risk your life as well.
Certainly. So this is the official uniform of a Ukrainian soldier. It's actually a pretty useful and effective digicami that I found more effective than the uniform that I was provided in the U.S. military before I went to Iraq 20 years ago. But I'm wearing this uniform because the representative of the Ukrainian government here in Seattle has requested that I properly represent the Ukrainian military while giving interviews, specifically describing my service to the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people in uniform in 2022. So I was a soldier in the International Legion, 1st Battalion, 1st Battalion, Charlie Company, 2nd Platoon, Orc Hunters. I was in the Legion from April to August of 2022 and stationed east of Kharkiv. And so this is the uniform that I wore there and I brought back home with me.
And those who are watching, they probably know I'm Kharkiv-born U.S. citizen, so that matters just so much. When I saw your presentation that you guys just watched as well, and you mentioned Stary Saltiv and the area itself, that just rang so many memories, and it just hurts to know that all of this, including my parents' house and apartment being bombed first thing when Russia invaded, that it's all sort of now questionable as how it will end and what the future will be for not just the area, but for the people itself. But can you share your personal takeaways?
Well, I was in Ukraine for 6 months. It was a life-changing experience, one of the most intense experiences of my life on many different levels. And then I was just back in Ukraine a few months ago, where we were touring defense manufacturers making systems for Ukraine's defenders. So, and then I work with Ukrainians every day, so I have a lot of experience with the culture. And I just have to mention one thing about Kharkiv. Kharkiv is a town a lot of Americans are not familiar with, but it really has a different culture in a lot of ways than Western Ukraine. I'm told it's like the New Jersey of Ukraine. It's very gritty, very hardworking, very blue collar town, and the orcs may knock out Kharkiv's power. They're busily doing that every day. They may knock out the water. They may cause untold misery to the inhabitants of Kharkiv, but I don't think they'll ever take that city. Those people are never leaving. They are very pro-Ukraine, very pro their area, and very strong, and they're going to be impossible to get out of there, which is as it should be. So I just wanted to mention that about that town. I have a lot of love for Kharkiv. I spent a lot of time there.
My point was only to mention that Kharkiv is very much Russian-speaking city. I grew up speaking Russian. I learned Ukrainian in school, but it was never the language we spoke, which does not mean that we are pro-Russian or that we are, somewhere. My grandfather came to Kharkiv. He was born in Russia. He came to Kharkiv during USSR when he was sent, so to speak, dispatched there to open a university, which he did. And he was the biggest nationalist when it comes to Ukraine. He would only watch Ukrainian television in the 90s. And we had only UT1, like one channel that was in Ukrainian. That's the only thing he watched. And it doesn't define somebody by the language they speak in Ukraine. I know people who are from Kharkiv now just speak Ukrainian. Broken Ukrainian, doesn't matter. We're just going to stick to one language just to show the affiliation. But it is important to know that Kharkiv was never Russian. It was always Ukrainian. And folks usually mention that, well, the first city to fall would be Kharkiv, which certainly has never manifested itself, nor it will. And I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, from an outsider's perspective, I had a lot of things to learn when I moved to Ukraine. When I lived there for 6 months as a soldier, and one of the first things I learned is whether people speak Russian or Ukrainian doesn't make this tiniest difference on their level of patriotism. I met many Ukrainians who spoke, like you say, broken Ukrainian, but were fervent patriots. And unfortunately, I met a few Ukrainians who natively spoke Ukrainian in the far west, who had very comfortable lives and perhaps weren't as committed to seeing the war through as the people in the east who are under constant bombardment would be, right? So the language is really, I wouldn't say it's irrelevant, but it is a very small factor.
Yeah, and it's very different too. If we travel to western part of Ukraine, it's also different customs. It's also different, sometimes even religion. It's very. We learned to coexist together and love each other. We shared, same types of food preferences and whatnot, but it was never an issue. It was never that somebody waited for Putin to save Russian-speaking folks. That's just a made-up story, which completely just talks about the propaganda. But as we're meeting here, Ukrainians on one side are very much hoping for what's to come. There's bloggers, YouTubers, and people who are calling us with, Happy New Year. It's just 19 days till Trump comes in. Like, oh my God, what are you waiting for? And there's others who are just kicklessly scared and say, oh my God, that's what, and they certainly listen to different types of sources. There's a problem with information in Ukraine, as much as it is a problem here to learn factual information about Ukraine. So, to dive into the issue, what Ukraine as a conflict did for United States. I know we did a lot for Ukraine. We saved it. Biden administration dispatched aid. It saved it. Let's put it out. What did Ukrainian conflict teach us, and why does it matter to us Americans?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and that's one that I think that Americans don't think about often enough, and that it's not presented to the American audience enough. Why does Ukraine matter to Americans, essentially? And I think that this conflict, I think it was a massive, gross miscalculation by Putin. I think that's pretty obvious. You can see it by the expansion of NATO and by how he's really destroyed his economy. The Russian economy is teetering on the edge of a cliff, and how he's sacrificed the lives of almost of 750,000 Russians in this quixotic quest to dominate their neighbor. It's backfired greatly. I think that a lot of Americans have, Americans hate bullies. And by attacking his neighbor in this kinetic way, as opposed to the previous way that he was primarily attacking his neighbors, which is through misinformation and propaganda and hybrid warfare, by actually sending the tanks over the border, Putin laid his cards on the table and showed the world what his true intentions are, and really allowed people from all around the world to join together to try to block this fascist authoritarian impulse. And I think in that regard, he did the world a favor. The expression I heard in Ukraine numerous times was, Putin did what no Ukrainian politician could ever do. He united the Ukrainian people. And in extension, he also alerted the world's people to what his true intentions are, and why Americans and Brits and Germans and Frenchies and Taiwanese and Japanese should reevaluate their current defense posture and really realize that there are major risks that could affect their personal freedom and their economic prosperity. So I think we Americans, if we're smart, we'll look at the lessons from history, and we'll see what's happening now in Ukraine, and we will take precautions to ensure that this doesn't also happen in Moldova and in Taiwan and in Poland and in Estonia. This is not just a Ukraine-only problem. This is a world problem, and I think we Americans need to not adopt an isolationist model that didn't work very well for us in the last two large conflicts. We need to learn from this, and we need to prepare for it strongly.
Absolutely. He also enlarged NATO, right? He pretty much led to Finland and Sweden joining, which they pretty much opposed, but they woke up very fast. They know what Russia is. They still have generations who are alive to this day to remember what Russian boot feels like, which is very foreign to us here. And it's difficult to understand, unfortunately, unless you experienced it. And on one hand, yes, we united more as as a NATO alliance, as a defense alliance, enlarged it as well. But also Putin gained support with the BRICS, right? With specifically China, Iran, North Korea, created this evil axis, if you will. What type of influence did that have on Ukrainian issue? What type of, does it add to the importance of Ukrainian conflict ending a certain way? Because now pretty much Ukraine is in the open fighting also North Korea, and indirectly Iran and China, their help, right, in terms of Russia. Does it add to importance of us having a win there, or some
Absolutely.
type of win?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, there hasn't been one agreed upon expression. We're still waiting for Churchill to come along and name this emerging alliance of authoritarian states. A lot of people don't like axis of evil because of the global war on terror connotations of it. But yes, what we're seeing is a banding together of authoritarian, anti-democracy, malignant states and non-state actors around the world are realizing that they have things in common with their authoritarian, malevolent brothers, and they're ganging up on the sleeping democracies. And the democracies of the world are stronger than the authoritarian states, but as we know, we're easily distracted. And so many Americans don't know that Putin hosted a Hamas delegation just a few weeks before October 7th last year. And he hosted Hamas afterwards. He was kind of quiet about it, but he did. And it makes you wonder, did he give the green light? Did he have any involvement? Boy, if he did, it was a masterpiece of three-dimensional chess, because that attack on Israel dramatically decreased support for Ukraine. It took the world's attention elsewhere, redirected a lot of donation money, a lot of time at the UN, a lot of NATO focus. So, but you see this connection between Hamas, Russia, Iran, North Korea, China. A lot of the world's dictatorships and authoritarian states are banding together, and you saw the exact same thing roughly 100 years ago in the 1930s with the rise of fascism. The fascist countries around the world started working together, and the West slept. You know, we had been in a big war. Nobody wanted a repeat of it. We thought if we ignored the problem, it would go away. We were very divided. We squabbled instead of preparing properly. And I would argue that the same situation is happening now. We can see the problem. You know, Ukraine in 2022 to 2024 is Spain in 1935 to 1938. And the Western democracies did not support Spain. You know, the Soviet Union actually supported Spain to a certain extent, but not enough. And you saw what happened when Hitler, went all in supporting Spain's fascists, right? And you compare that to what's happening in eastern Ukraine right now, and you can see what the eventual goal of the fascists would be, and why we ununited democracies need to come together and oppose that.
Absolutely. And before we diving as to what's next, because I know a lot of questions came in Q&A format for you to explain what's going to happen, what if. But let's summarize what did happen in the past now 3 years. I know that most of those who will be watching this are Biden supporters, are Democrats, and I share your, for those who are watching, I share your position. But it is important for us to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And to analyze, because if anything, that will make us wiser and smarter, right, and more clever as we pursue what's going to happen next. A lot of Ukrainians are easily convinced that Trump will be the savior because they feel that Biden didn't do enough. So, can we explain why they feel that way? You were there. You know what's happening right there. You know it not from the news sources. You know exactly what has been there. What has been the strategy, and why the aid was so slow?
Well, that's a great question. I wish nobody in the world except for Biden and maybe Blinken, maybe Sullivan, really know the answer to that. I've sat in numerous. I've sat in over a dozen offices across the table from representatives and senators who've told me to my face that they don't know why the Biden administration pursued such a puzzling, baffling, and frankly infuriating incrementalist drip, drip, drip strategy of at first denying that the Ukrainians would ever be able to use a particular weapon system, and then a few months later, well, we can train them on it, and a few months later, well, we can allow a NATO ally to transfer a dozen, and then a few months later, well, we can transfer 20, and then a few months later, oh, maybe 100, and then a few months later, you know, they did this with HIMARS, they did it with Bradleys, they did it with M1s, they did it with ATACMS for the HIMARS, and then finally, most recently, they've done this with F-16s. It's really puzzling. Nobody really knows why. There's various conspiracy theories, especially around the idea that perhaps the Biden administration wanted to prolong the war. If that's the case, then you know, they have the blood of tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers who threw themselves against the very well prepared Russian defenses last summer. Everyone knew that there was a counteroffensive being prepared, and they even knew approximately where it was going to be directed. Everyone knew the strategy was going to be to cut the Russian land bridge to go south of Kherson or nearby, and cut the supply to Crimea. And it failed. It failed because the Russians had months to prepare. If we had only provided them with the tools needed early on frankly, in winter of last year, let alone spring, then there would have been a much better chance they could have succeeded. So I have a lot of impatience and frustration with the Biden administration. I know they've been a supporter of Ukraine, but the way that they've done it has been just completely puzzling. Now, things are things are almost certainly going to change here very soon. Do we expect that Trump is going to flip a magic switch on January 20th and suddenly there will be a ceasefire and there will be a positive outcome? We're not holding our breath. It would be great, and we certainly hope for the best, but we don't expect that there will be a sudden change for the best. we want to provide Ukraine with as many tools and as many resources and as many options as possible. At the end of the day, it's Ukraine's decision whether or not to carry on the fight. And I was just in Ukraine 2 months ago. I was there for 2 weeks. I talked to many, many Ukrainians in Lviv and Kharkiv. Lviv and Kyiv. I didn't make it to Kharkiv this time, but we'll fix that next time. And every Ukrainian that I spoke to said, we desperately need American aid. It's so important. Thank you for what you're doing, talking to Congress. We're very concerned about what's going to happen when Trump gets in, but we hope for the best. And B, even if American aid evaporates, we will continue to fight on. Mm-hmm. And that's very important because that narrative is being left out of American news media, mm-hmm. perhaps purposefully, I'm not sure. But it is very important to note that, I mean, it would be a huge negative impact on the Ukrainians' ability to fight if American aid suddenly dried up. That said, they would continue to fight. And if Trump pushes Zelensky to accept a unfair ceasefire, perhaps one that removes all sanctions against Russia and puts limits on Ukraine's ability to Ukraine and join NATO within a certain period of time or something. If those are unfair, Zelensky, I'm sure, will very, very politely decline and continue mm-hmm. to fight, as well they should. And you can see the efforts by NATO and by the Western allies, by Western Europe, to essentially Trump-proof any continuing aid to ensure that no matter what America decides, the Europeans at least provide what they can provide and hopefully ramp up. I will say the incoming Trump administration has been pretty the personnel, as the old expression goes, personnel is policy, and the personnel directly dealing with Ukraine seem to be pretty pro-Ukraine, and we just saw that Putin declined Trump's peace proposal, which frankly is good. It's not good that he declined it, but it's good that the peace proposal was unacceptable to Putin. You expect that this is the first peace proposal is more of a negotiating strategy and is likely to be unacceptable to one side or another. And it's good that was Putin declining it and not Zelensky declining it. So I will say that so far the signs have been reasonably positive, but none of us are holding our breath for January 20th.
Right. And also we saw it many times when somebody is running for president, is an elected president or president-elect, and then is in office. It's three different situations, and they are facing three different types of factors, and they might change and switch. Now, Secretary of State Blinken was very much in charge of Ukrainian negotiations and diplomacy and also aid given. He gave an interview to New York Times yesterday for their podcast. And two things that I want to, or two takeouts from this interview, I want to show you to allow you to comment on this. First, he was asked to comment on the initial strategy for Ukraine. Why did they decide to provide aid and sort of in this drip format? Which, by the way, I also wanted to mention that the big delay, right, almost half a year, was also kind of caused by Congress, had to do with Trump calling Congress not to allow Ukraine aid to pass. So let's put it out there. It was not all on Biden and Blinken, but let's listen to him. I really want to hear what you say because I have my feelings, but I'm going to let you speak on the facts. And so raise the hand anytime you want to comment. Okay. All right. Let's do it.
Strategic decisions on Ukraine. The first, because of that fear of direct conflict, was to restrict Ukraine's use of American weapons within Russia. The second was to support Ukraine's military offensive without a parallel diplomatic track to try and end the conflict. How do you look back on those decisions now?
So first, if you look at the trajectory of the conflict, because we saw it coming, we were able to make sure that not only were we prepared and allies and partners were prepared, but that the Ukraine was prepared. We made sure that well before the Russian aggression happened, starting in September, the Russian aggression happened in February, starting in September and then again in December, we quietly got a lot of weapons to Ukraine to make sure that they had in hand what they needed to defend themselves, things like Stingers, javelins that they could use, that were instrumental in preventing Russia from taking Kyiv, from rolling over the country, erasing it from the map, and indeed pushing the Russians back. But I think what's so important to understand is at different points in time, people get focused on one weapon system or another. Is it an Abrams tank? Is it an F-16? Is it an ATACMS, a missile? What we've had to look at each and every time is not only should we give this particular system to the Ukrainians, but do they know how to use it? Do they have the requisite training? Can they maintain it? Is it part of a coherent plan? All of those things factored into the decisions we made on what to give them and when to give it. But in each and every time, it was to make sure that they had what they needed to defend themselves. In terms of diplomacy, look, we've exerted extraordinary diplomacy.
So I agree with what he says about the beginning of the war. Frankly, the administration deserves some praise for really sounding the alarm that this was not a drill. This was not an exercise. Russia really was planning to invade, and I know even a lot of Ukrainians didn't believe it. So they do deserve some praise for really being the voice in the wilderness, drawing attention to that. And as he says, providing specifically javelins. The stingers that they provided, those were used effectively a few times, but the Ukrainians also had SA-6s and also Soviet-era anti-air that worked as well. But the javelins, specifically in the first few weeks of the war, were critical to stopping Russian incursions at the borders. The criticism is more about in the last 2.5 years since the invasion, 3 years, why this extremely slow incrementalist approach. And, he says, well, the Ukrainians may or may not know how to use these weapon systems, and they may not have the logistics trained to maintain them. Well, why not start earlier? I mean, the DoD is comprised of a lot of smart people and a lot of people who are prepared to plan out, okay, if we're going to provide this number of M1 Abrams tanks in a year, what mechanics, what spare parts, what supply depots, what training facilities, why not start that earlier? And so it's just very puzzling that it took so long to get these really basic weapon systems in country and the Ukrainians ready to use them. Also, I'll just say, training is important, and the NATO training was pretty high quality. But realistically, the Ukrainians are pretty smart people, and they're able to make do with very short notice and they're very adept at self-training. Ukraine has been described as a nation of MacGyvers. I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but there was a TV show here called MacGyver, and in it, he invents something out of nothing. And the Ukrainians are very good at doing that. I guarantee you, if you gave a Ukrainian unit an M1 Abrams and tank and 2 weeks to YouTube and Google and make contact to figure out how to use that thing, they would definitely use it quite well. So that's really an excuse that I don't really buy from him. But it is true in the beginning, the administration deserves some praise.
Let's see what else he got to say.
In bringing and keeping together more than 50 countries, not only in Europe, but well beyond, in support of Ukraine and in defense of these principles that Russia also attacked back in February of that year. Look, I worked very hard in the lead up to the war, including meetings with my Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, in Geneva a couple of months before the war, trying to find a way to see if we could prevent it, trying to test the proposition whether this was really about Russia's concerns for its security, concerns somehow about Ukraine and the threat that it posed, or NATO and the threat that it posed, or whether this was about what it in fact is about, which is Putin's imperial ambitions and the desire to recreate a greater Russia, to subsume Ukraine back into Russia. But we had to test that proposition, and we were intensely engaged diplomatically with Russia. Since then, had there been any opportunity to engage diplomatically in a way that could end the war on just and durable terms, we would have been the first to seize them. Unfortunately, at least till this moment, we haven't seen any signs that Russia's been genuinely prepared to engage. I hope that changes.
Yeah, so he's correct there. I mean, it's good that the administration has been talking to the Russian counterparts and reviewing any kind of negotiation proposals. And now it's very interesting. It turns out that there have been ongoing negotiations, I believe, in UAE. And the details of the Russian peace proposals, I want to say peace proposals, have leaked. And they're quite interesting to see what are the Russians' plans for Ukraine post-war, right? You can really get a good idea of what are Russia's plans for the war, for the country after war. And of course, they're ridiculous and completely unacceptable to any country. But I will say it is good to be talking to Russia and seeing what sort of negotiation they have. But he's correct. So far, their negotiations have been maximalist and inflexible, and really, I would argue, irrelevant.
Would you, how would you comment to somebody who says, like some people in my family, why didn't U.S. just bomb Russia back and win the war right away? Why didn't NATO just step in and fight the bear in Ukraine and just be done with that? So China sees what they could be dealing with, North Korea, Iran sees the same thing. And so that would just end in Ukraine. While Ukraine is suffering, let's just end the war there. How realistic is it, given Russia's nuclear power, given Putin being, if he's cornered, being perhaps ready to pull the trigger or do something? What's your comment on that?
Well, I try to take a reasonable, based on a reasonable reality-based approach. First of all, Putin's nuclear saber rattling doesn't scare me. If we allow a nuclear-armed state like Russia or China or North Korea, or if we allow a nuclear-armed state to blackmail us in any way, then of course they will, and we will find that our foreign policy is destroyed as a result. We cannot appease a nuclear-powered state. Appeasement didn't work in 1938 with Hitler. It won't work in 2022 or 2025 with Putin. It won't work with Xi in China. It won't work with Rocket Man in Pyongyang. So I'm not, I wouldn't say not concerned about Russia's nukes, but I don't believe that he would use them in a conventional war like this. Putin cares most about his own life and about protecting his power structure, and he knows that as soon as he would press the button, his personal life would be forfeit. And so I think it's very unlikely that he would use nukes. That said, do I believe that America should send boots on the ground to Ukraine to fight on the front lines against Russia? For this, I would have to take off my Ukrainian army cap and put on my American cap and say that probably that is not in the charter and the strategy of NATO to do this, because Ukraine, although an ally, is not part of NATO. And so sending boots on the ground, American or French or German or British boots on the ground, would probably fracture and damage the ability of NATO to protect Western Europe and America. And frankly, we don't need to. Ukraine has 36 million people. They have not fully mobilized yet. There's still a lot of strong, brave men in Ukraine, and women. And, what we need to do is give them the tools needed to survive. Right? Ukraine is not a rich country. And I was a soldier there. We did not have enough boots. We did not have enough, we had enough rifles, but we didn't have enough ammunition sometimes. We definitely did not have enough night vision or drones or anti-drone equipment. We rode to a war in beat-up old vehicles that were falling apart. We had a tiny little trickle of Western equipment. I saw javelins and I saw NLAWs. I never held one. I held 40-year-old and shot 40-year-old Russian RPG-7s, which is not what you want against a modern tank and isn't going to do you any good against a drone. So really what we just need to do is dramatically ramp up supplies to the Ukrainian military. And then there's no need to discuss foreign boots on the ground. And that would give no excuses for Putin to ramp things up. And hopefully, so far the North Korean, 12,000 North Korean soldiers, those have been fighting in Russia. If those set foot across the border into Ukraine, then there should be an enormous international outcry and increase in support for Ukraine, because then it really will be a world war. And so we want, if at all possible, for the red lines to be red lines that Russia crosses. Now, that said, I don't believe in this red lines about technology. I think we should have flooded Ukraine with every kind of high-tech weapon system back in 2022 and early 2023, frankly. I don't buy this thing that we have to train up Ukrainian soldiers for 6 months in some base in England or South Carolina before they can learn how to turn a weapon system on and use Google Translate to translate from English to Ukrainian. That's not true. There's enormous opportunity to better support Ukraine's military, and I would do it with technology rather than boots on the ground.
Can you explain? I know I tried many times, but when you say it, it matters more. Can you explain how we use the aid to Ukraine to replenish, but also rejuvenate, so to speak, our own stockpiles at Pentagon? In this case, what benefit did we have from the war in Ukraine? We sold them the old stuff, got the new stuff, right? Explaining it in very dumb terms. But also we did test our new tech there, and probably which led to drones, and understanding that the drones are maybe a key factor in upcoming conflict. Can you speak to that, please?
Certainly, yeah, that's a topic near and dear to my heart. I do a lot of work with defense technology. You can see some examples of that behind me. I'm very proud of the work that we've done to help increase the quality and quantity of tools in the hands of Ukraine's defenders. So the average American has this notion that the U.S. Congress just cuts a check of billions of dollars and then somehow it shows up in Zelensky's bank account. But in reality, the way it works is this is a very complicated system. There's several websites out there you can direct users to that break down how the money is allocated. The vast majority of it stays in the United States and is used to pay for weapon systems here that then get sent to Ukraine. And of those weapon systems, the majority of them are older, oftentimes obsolete, older versions of the frontline weapon systems that the U.S. Army is using, U.S. military. People may not realize the way the U.S. military, the way the DoD, the Department of Defense works, is they don't like throwing things away. So there are, dozens, if not hundreds, of warehouses around the United States with old Humvees, old airplanes, old M1s. It's oftentimes harder to upgrade an existing system, which they're constantly doing, by the way. Every weapon system in the United States, everyone is getting upgraded. Every single one has a plan for upgrading. Everything from their rifles, which, by the way, they just upgraded. So there are literally millions of M16, A4 rifles sitting in warehouses that should be in Ukraine, frankly. So every single weapon system has a force readiness advancement program, and sometimes it's a few years out, and sometimes it's a decade out. But every weapon system gets looked at for advancement, and like I say, oftentimes they can't easily upgrade them. So what they do is they buy new ones and they stick the old ones in a warehouse, and oftentimes those ones are sent to Ukraine. Now, unfortunately, what we've seen in many cases is the decisions about what to get sent to Ukraine are based along the lines of which congressional districts have factories that a particular congressman wants jobs to be activated in, as opposed to what the Ukrainian military actually needs. And so you end up with very much a hodgepodge of different weapon systems in Ukraine. You've got AMX-10 tanks from France. You've got Bradleys from the U.S. and M1s from the U.S. then you've got, leopards from Germany. You've got leopards from Denmark that don't use the same parts. You've got, it's really, it's a quartermaster's nightmare. You can imagine how difficult it must be to find spare parts in Ukraine. I honestly don't know how they do it. I know how they do it. They cannibalize a lot. Basically, the decision making about which weapon systems to send to Ukraine are not necessarily as helpful to Ukraine as you would think, and we're certainly not taking that pile of money and buying brand new weapon systems to send to Ukraine. We are, but in a very few cases, majority not. The other thing that you brought up is what is America learning from the conflict in Ukraine, and how are we benefiting from a national defense posture? And so, yeah, I mean, first of all, we're benefiting because a lot of manufacturers are making a lot of money from this war, and for better or worse. And there are a lot of American jobs dependent on it. So when we empty out that marshalling yard with those 1,000 Humvees gathering dust, well, we need to build more Humvees. So then that's American jobs. But another way that we really benefit directly from the conflict is in learnings about what works on the modern battlefield and what doesn't work. And so a lot of American systems, America excels in building small quantities of extremely expensive, what we call exquisite systems. The F-16 would be a good example, or even better, the F-22 Raptor. These extremely expensive small quantity systems that are cutting edge and designed to fight against a near peer adversary, but perhaps are not as well suited to a grinding attritional fight in Ukraine, where neither side has air cover and you're not using maneuver warfare. You're using incrementalist grinding positional warfare, where it's not necessarily being decided by which side has the most advanced tank or advanced airplane. And so we've learned a lot. It's been exposed that a lot of American systems, some American systems are great. The Stinger, it's 60 years old and it works great. It's fantastic. We recently restarted production lines for the Stinger. They had to dust off all that equipment. I think they had to bring some guys back from retirement to figure out how to work them. It's a huge success story. But a lot of the newer American-made systems don't work. They're not effective. A good example is the Switchblade. A Switchblade is a mortar-launched drone, a loitering drone. It's not a suicide device. It's a ISR. It's a intel surveillance reconnaissance. But it's so easily jammed that it's essentially useless. And the Ukrainians, they tried a few of them. They didn't work because they're jammed instantly, and so they just left them in a warehouse. What works much better is more cutting-edge, improved versions of drones that the Ukrainians just buy from China. They cost a lot less. They're more resistant against jamming. If they get lost, it's not the end of the world. You just buy another one for another $5,000. It doesn't cost $200,000, and it's easier to use and easier to place. Blah blah blah. So we have learned a lot, not just from what technologies actually worked, but really in the overall idea of what is needed to fight a war against a near-peer adversary. In other words, not fighting the Taliban. You're fighting a near-peer adversary in 2022 to 2025. What's needed is a real focus from the industrial base on innovation and on bringing ideas from conception to prototyping to production in a very short period of time. And the Ukrainians have shown incredible adeptness and agility at doing this, at taking some idea from some soldier out there who has a crazy idea in a trench somewhere, and then having people in various innovation centers back in Kyiv or Kharkiv come up with the prototype it, and then have some governmental offices actually help them turn that into production, and then start ramping it up quickly in basement workshops all around the country. And frankly, we have to learn from that, because our idea to production cycle here in the United States for weapon systems is measured in years, whereas in Ukraine it's been made clear it has to be measured in weeks. So we've learned a lot from Ukraine. that will be very helpful, especially if, for example, China invades Taiwan, which is quite possible. You can be sure that the government and the military leaders in China and of course in Russia are looking very, very closely at what's happening in Ukraine, and it would behoove us to do the same.
So, having said that, wouldn't it be beneficial for NATO to accept Ukraine? I know the problem is that there's a war in Ukraine. So, for that, we kind of need a ceasefire. Just legitimately, it doesn't work to accept Ukraine. You join the fight right away. But given that people are more experienced, given that they are ready, that they're battlefield tested, if you will, wouldn't it be beneficial for NATO to consider at least sort of a fast track for Ukraine if, let's say, Trump comes in and somehow achieves ceasefire? Maybe it's an ugly one. Maybe it's conceding, territory, demilitarizing Ukraine, you know. But this part, which I see the biggest issue with, is if the part of ceasefire is this 20-year or 10-year ban of joining NATO. That really provides no guarantees, maybe sort of like a paper tiger guarantees for Ukraine. But wouldn't that be the most important point to negotiate if we were to discuss ceasefire?
Well, I think it's a point to discuss, and it's certainly something that should be on the table. And a lot of people would argue that NATO membership should be there should be a path to it within a reasonable time frame. This is something that we discuss a lot in my group and amongst the pro-Ukraine community here in the United States. It's there's strong feelings on either side. Personally, I can see either side, and if Ukraine does not join NATO, I don't think it's the end of the world. The most important thing is the security guarantees for Ukraine. If there are, let's say, it wouldn't be NATO, but let's say there are UN peacekeepers along the border between Ukraine, between the occupied territories, the temporarily occupied territories, and the rest of Ukraine. I think that would go a long way towards dissuading breaches of the ceasefire by Russia. They would have to be international. They couldn't be one side or another. They would have to be from a third party that was not allied to either side, so that there would be credibility there, and preferably from Western countries. And I think if there was sufficient soldiers there, that would help dissuade violations of the ceasefire. And then, of course, you can. It's been brought up that NATO membership is a piece of paper that probably is not going to be agreed to by Hungary and now Slovakia, unfortunately. But if there are sufficient security guarantees without the actual title of NATO membership, if the big three, Britain, France, Germany, provide enough security guarantees to Ukraine without actual NATO membership, well, then that gives Putin a off-ramp. He can go to his people and say, well, you see, this war, or this special military operation, we succeeded. We kept Ukraine from joining NATO, even if Ukraine is strong enough to replicate the actual value of being in NATO. Frankly, I would rather see Ukraine defense capabilities dramatically increased rather than joining NATO, because the country's already at war. So Article 5 is very much open to interpretation for a country at war. And so if they join NATO, there's a ceasefire, and Russia is a master at hybrid warfare. They essentially invented the concept. If there are little green men after that in Kyiv, blowing up buildings or assassinating Zelensky or something, is that a violation of Article 5? Well, but they weren't wearing uniforms. They were just on vacation. It's very open to interpretation. So I would want to focus not entirely, but focus the majority of negotiations on dramatically ramping up Ukraine's defense capabilities, and like I said, having some sort of respected, robust international peacekeeping force there to maintain the peace.
And it's always the devil is in the details. They have a ceasefire, for instance, on the northern side of Israel with Lebanon, and it's overseen by the French and U.S. But then still, when Israel sees a potential threat from Lebanon, they can still provide, cross the border and sort of like cede territory, which they're doing now. So it's very much in the details, and it's very important who will put those ceasefire agreements together. Trump's administration, again, let's hope that they pay due attention to the details. Now, as to Blinken, the last clip that I wanted to comment on, he was asked as to what's happening afterwards. He did comment on the ceasefire, his opinion on that, and also who Ukraine will be maybe relying on. So let's watch that clip. Let's see if it's any use for you and our audience.
However, Ukraine has been left in this position now where a new administration is coming in. They have a very different view of the conflict. And one could argue that Ukraine is not in a terribly strong position to be able to navigate what comes next. We know that President-elect Trump has members of people that surround him that are very willing to see Ukraine cede territory to Russia. There has been no parallel diplomatic track, and the weapons are probably going to be drying up. So, I mean, do you feel like you've left Ukraine in the strongest position that you could have, or were there things that you could have done differently?
Well, first, what we've left is Ukraine, which was not self-evident because Putin's ambition was to erase it from the map. We stopped that. Putin has failed. His strategic objective in regaining Ukraine has failed and will not succeed. Ukraine is standing. And I believe it also has extraordinary potential, not only to survive, but actually to thrive going forward. And that does depend on decisions that future administrations and many other countries will make. Right now, as I'm looking at this, I think the real measure of success is whether going forward, Ukraine will continue to stand strong as an independent country, increasingly integrated with Western institutions, and able to stand on its own feet militarily, economically, democratically. And in each of those areas, we put Ukraine on a trajectory to do that.
Do you think it's time to end the war, though?
These are decisions for Ukrainians to make. They have to decide where their future is and how they want to get there. Where the line is drawn on the map, at this point, I don't think is fundamentally going to change very much. The real question is, can we make sure that Ukraine is in a position to move forward strongly?
That the areas that Russia controls, you feel will have to be ceded?
Ceded is not the question. The question is, the line, as a practical matter, in the foreseeable future, is unlikely to move very much. Ukraine's claim on that territory will always be there. And the question is, will they find ways, with the support of others, to regain territory that's been lost? I think the critical thing now going forward is this. If there is going to be a resolution, or at least a near-term resolution, because it's unlikely that Putin will give up on his ambitions. If there's a ceasefire, then in Putin's mind, the ceasefire is likely to give him time to rest, to refit, to reattack at some point in the future. So what's going to be critical to make sure that any ceasefire that comes about is actually enduring is to make sure that Ukraine has the capacity going forward to deter further aggression. And that can come in many forms. It could come through NATO, and we put Ukraine on a path to NATO membership. It could come through security assurances, commitments, guarantees by different countries to make sure that Russia knows that if it reattacks, it's going to have a big problem. That, I think, is going to be critical to making sure that any deal that's negotiated actually endures and then allows Ukraine the space, the time to grow strong as a country.
It's interesting. What I'm hearing you say is that Ukraine's fate will no longer rest in its major supporter, the United States. You see it as resting elsewhere, Europe, et cetera.
Look, I hope very much. And I don't want to say expect, but I certainly hope very much that the United States will remain the vital supporter that it's been for Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, so Blinken's a smart guy, and I agree with 90% of what he says there. But you'll notice that he repeatedly skips past her question about if we could have supported Ukraine more, which is the key thing that most people in my circles don't much appreciate him for. Blinken and Sullivan are oftentimes blamed, either rightfully so or not. We're not sure, for this extremely slow incrementalist support for Ukraine. If everyone knows, if we'd given Ukraine the support that we're giving them now, if we'd done that back in 2023, let's say, with sufficient training and logistical support, Ukraine would no doubt be in a much, much better place. If we truly made the United States the arsenal of democracy as it was in World War II, and we really supported Ukraine to the extent that we supported, let's say, Britain in 1940 to 1941 through until we actually joined the war, the tail end of 1941, really 1942. The Ukrainian chances on the battlefield would be much better, and they'd be in a much better position if the aid does shut off, as we all hope does not happen, but as Blinken says, might happen. If the aid is shut off, obviously the most aid that is currently in country, the better before that date. And so there's a lot of pressure being put on the existing administration. There's still $5.5 billion, last time I checked, unspent, unallocated in the Presidential Drawdown Authority that needs to be spent before the 20th. If a penny of that money is not spent before January 20th, it's just a crying shame, and it's a real missed opportunity. But yeah, I mean, to his point, I agree with him. We don't know. We hope that American aid continues. Certainly, but if it doesn't, yes, the burden is going to fall more upon the Western allies. And I think that the Biden administration has done a lot of really positive things to try to better integrate Ukraine with Western Europe and try to train them up and try to give them the negotiating tools needed. It's just the aid, The Polish border should be as far as the eye can see, marshalling yard filled with military vehicles and spare parts and logistics, tools and mechanics. Whenever an M1 breaks down at the eastern front, it should be loaded onto a rail, and the next day it should be across the border in Przemyśl. There's a huge military repair facility in Przemyśl, Poland. It should be in that facility getting fixed. And while it's going back to Poland, there should be 3 more heading to the front. This practice of this drip, 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 giving Ukraine barely enough to stay in the fight, it really needs to end. And I really hope that the Trump administration, who we all know Trump doesn't like to do things in half measures. He's a sledgehammer, right? He'll either ignore a problem or he's going to smash it. And so what we're hoping is that Trump will, if Putin continues to turn down and snub Trump's peace overtures, that Trump will dramatically increase aid to the point where Ukraine would have the tools needed to really have a strong negotiating position. This is what's called the pincushion strategy. We're hoping that Trump turns Ukraine into a pincushion, and so that Putin's greedy hands can't grab it, and hopefully he doesn't turn the spigot off and stop aid.
My only concern is that he is such a fan of folks like Kim Jong-un, who's very aligned with Putin. He wrote him a love letter now on New Year's and pledged allegiance, even though he's getting his folks who are sent there for combat experience in the bags, if any. My thing is, like, how will he stand against North Korea and Iran, essentially, but also against China, given Musk is there, very pro-China on his regard. My problem with Trump's team is that he has assembled a team with so many different interests that all what unites them now is getting to the White House. And then when they're there, which certainly now at this point they will, everybody will have a different take on certain things. Any comments on that regard? How do you see perhaps Musk's influence, given that he's very much interested in still keeping and having a profitable, production facility in China, as much as in Germany, as much as he's rumored to open some Tesla facility in Russia as well? Will that affect? And do you see Trump being affected by that, or is he using sort of Musk for the money to get to the White House, and then he's the president? Could be too.
Well, I think the whole world recognizes that Musk has a really strong post-election influence over the Trump administration, and I expect that will continue for some time. Eventually, based on past experience with the first Trump administration, there will probably be some sort of high-profile falling out. When you put two men with egos that size into one building for long enough, usually, eventually, one of them has to exit. But until then, yeah, Trump will continue to have an enormous outsized influence, and as you point out, probably a very pro-China and possibly anti-Taiwan influence. And there's a whole, you have to understand, there's a whole separate parallel effort of very quiet but very effective pro-Taiwan defense support. And China has just launched the world's first drone aircraft carrier. And they a drone factory owner in China accidentally let slip that he had received, his one factory had received an order for 1 million suicide drones along the lines of the Shahed drones. And those Shahed drones, they can fly 2,000 miles, 2,500 kilometers. Taiwan is only 180 miles from the mainland China, so couple those drones with aircraft carriers, and they can easily pump out several dozen of those aircraft carriers. The possibility of China making aggressive moves against Taiwan in the next few years is going to be much higher than it has been. So that's a real worrying sign for international relations and the rule of law, of international law moving forward. So that's something that Musk's influence on is going to need to be closely watched. As far as Ukraine, Musk he has certainly not been pro-Ukraine, but he has not been as anti-Ukraine as he could have been. And so he will bear closer watching on that. I will say that the appointments that Trump has made, the old expression in is personnel is policy, and many of them are reasonably pro-Ukraine. So we will see what happens January 20th. Trump is very much an agent of chaos. Nobody knows what he will do. The guess is that he doesn't know what he'll do when he wakes up in the morning. So trying to predict what Trump will do is not. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. What I'm going to do, and what you can see the Western allies have done, is try to Trump-proof aid to Ukraine. And so I will say, I will give Trump credit where credit is due. He has really succeeded in lighting a fire under a lot of, frankly, lazy and underprepared European countries that have been shirking their duties to defend Western Europe for many decades and spending a bare pittance of what they should have been spending on their defense. And now, you can see. I mean, Poland is spending over 4%. I mean, Poland's turning into a defense colossus. Pretty soon, the Polish military will be stronger than the German military. And now you have the situation where Scholz last year he's of the left party in Germany, but he was posing at a new artillery factory holding an artillery shell, which is very unusual, right? There's been a slow, gradual realignment of priorities in Germany. Not fast enough, if you ask me, but at least it's going in the right direction. So fortunately, the Western powers are starting to invest in their own defense capabilities, and of course, some of that will benefit Ukraine. Is it going fast enough? Absolutely not. And so there's a strong effort, international effort involved to empower advocates in the major European countries, being England, Germany, and France, and also at the European Union in Brussels, to better support Ukraine. There's a lot of people working on that. If anybody watching this would like to get involved in that, I'd be happy to make connections. But really, at the end of the day, everyone's talking about Trump. Nobody really knows what's going to happen after the 20th. We all hope that he will continue or even ramp up supplies, and that he will enforce a fair peace. And things look decent now, but we're not holding our breath. We're going to keep doing this work, and no matter what comes out of the White House.
We saw, as to Musk, we saw his dramatic support for right wing, whether it is Germany or England, as recent as yesterday. 23 tweets in an hour in support of right wing folks in England, and then he donated, what was it, 300 million to Starmer. He proposes, he will interview AFD leader on X on January 10th. And supposedly, again, you never know what will happen ultimately. But altogether, supporting the right wing narrative. Not sure whether it will be very much against Ukraine. This also remains to be seen. I think, if we think about the right wing within the United States, or we think about the Republican nature, it was very pro-military usually. So let's see how this will manifest. But you mentioned the mothership. Let's call a thing a thing. The Chinese mothership with a bunch of drones in it. Now, my crazy mind goes to, is that what's happening here? Because when I joined, and yes, let's talk about the drones over in New York, New Jersey. Then we're going to talk about the Ukraine defense support. And guys, please stay here because we need your support. We need your understanding. And Carl will provide how you can also be involved. The drones over in New York, New Jersey. I personally joined the meetings for interagencies. Sort of, we had FBI and the CIA, we had Coast Guard, with everybody saying, you're making things up, you're mistaking planes for drones, nothing happens. On the other hand, I'm joining a briefing in England with folks who are tracking nuclear activities, and they say we have higher numbers now in New York, New Jersey area. This is what we're seeing now. Take it and interpret it. I'm not smart enough to put things together in this regard. Now I'm hearing, okay, China is a mothership. There was also a notion from the Coast Guard where they said that the drones were coming from the sea, and there were up to 50 of them or so coming at the same time, and they were returning to the sea. I know the variations folks are talking about from those are planes, stop talking about it, to those are UFOs, which is certainly another side of crazy. What's your take on it?
Well, the mysterious New Jersey drones, there's a lot of theories out there. I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen here. I'm not a big self-promoter. This is my Twitter account here, UA Legionnaire. If anybody watching this is interested in learning a lot about drone and anti-drone technology, feel free to follow me on Twitter. And we have regular Twitter space podcasts, and we've got a community of people working on drones and anti-drone technology. But I did a little over the last few weeks. I've done some deep dives into this New Jersey mystery drone phenomenon because it does tie into some of the work that we're doing with Ukrainian defense manufacturers. As a matter of fact, we have a team, Defense Tech for Ukraine, which is an allied organization to Ukraine Defense Support, has several members in New Jersey currently testing out a very innovative drone detection system. It's an acoustic drone detection system, meaning it detects via sound. And they're literally driving around in these counties of New Jersey that you see on the screen, following recent sightings and trying to identify these drones, especially the drones at night with their lights off. Usually the drones have their lights on, and it's almost always at night that people are seeing them. But occasionally they have their lights off, in which case you'd need radar or acoustic detection. And so they've had a few successful identifications, and they're trying to chase down. Actually, I probably shouldn't say. There's a few things that they're going to use these drone detectors for that I'm not at liberty to share. But anyway, if people would like more information about that, they can reach out privately. But you can see this is a little old here, but these locations are still pretty stable. You can see the drone. Most of the drone sightings have been inland in New Jersey, and then right here along the coast. And like you said, there have been numerous sightings of drones coming in from boats, and so Is there a Chinese or Iranian mothership anchored outside of the New Jersey coast sending drones into the U.S.? I'm pretty sure not. I'm sure the U.S. Coast Guard would have a thing or two to say about that. There's several theories you can see over on the right here. Several theories that I posted about this. This is actually quite old. This is from December, December 16th. But those theories are still, I think, probably in line with what we've heard from New Jersey mayors and from the governor's office. We have some good contacts in the governor's office, including the governor has spoken privately with a member of our group. And we're part of several private briefings for New Jersey mayors. And several of those mayors have given very factual interviews to the press describing what is the U.S. military and the U.S. government's best guesses about these drones. And it's pretty clear that they are U.S. They are sanctioned at the highest levels. This is, as you pointed out, talking about radioactivity, this is probably either a drill or a real life, not exercise, a real life deployment of drones to detect NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical device or material in that area. And we all hope it's a drill. But either way, the truth needs to come out. The administration needs to come clean and explain what exactly these drones are doing. It's very arrogant and dismissive and completely, frankly, unacceptable for whichever federal or state body is in control of these drones to not be explaining to the public what they're doing. We don't buy the it would cause mass hysteria argument. We don't buy the you're not smart enough to know the truth. You're not ready for the truth. No, that doesn't work. Let the chips fall where they may. Tell us what's actually going on. And frankly, fire the people who made the decision not to tell us in the beginning. I've got good friends who live in New Jersey and have seen these drones fly over their houses. They deserve to know why. And we're happy to play a small part in trying to identify these drones. I'd be happy to talk to you at length about some of the observations that we've uncovered. The drones themselves are the size of small planes. They do function like planes. They have FAA-approved markings. They fly in grid patterns. They fly at designated times, typically in the evening between 8 and 11 p.m. Eastern. They're flying over certain areas, exhibiting certain behavior that indicates that it's most likely that they're sniffing for NBC. And they do not emit RF frequency. They are autonomous in several different ways. And there's a lot more I could go into about these, but we're playing a very small part in helping to identify and track these drones, and proud of that. But realistically, what the situation, the take home from the situation is that America's national defense is not properly prepared to deal with a drone incursion or modern drone warfare. If these drones really were coming in from Iran, let's say, or China, let's say Iran, if China did this would be on a different level. Let's say just Iran. Let's think a happy thought. They stick some suicide drones in a cargo container that sails into the New York and New Jersey harbors and attack key American infrastructure in a plausibly deniable way, made with third-party components that aren't immediately tracked back, or they blame it on ISIS or something. Am I confident that America's infrastructure is properly hardened against drone attack? Absolutely not. I'm very much convinced that we're not properly prepared. And it's only a matter of time until there's a Luigi with a drone, is the expression that I've been told by my national security and DoD contacts. It's only a matter of time. Frankly, it's amazing that there hasn't been a high-profile assassination or murder attempt by drone. It's only a matter of time, and we're really ill prepared for it. So this should be this mystery drone phenomenon in New Jersey should serve as a wake-up call to America's security establishment and frankly, law enforcement, that we need to heavily invest in America's defense capability against drones. And this is another way in which Ukraine's hard-won lessons, very hard-won at the front lines, can benefit America, because the Ukrainians are very pro America, and they really want to thank America, and they want to help strengthen America's national defense. So there's a lot of lessons that could be learned there, and I would like to see America wake up to this threat and try to work closer with our good, loyal Ukrainian allies to better strengthen both of our security.
And what you are doing, you are strengthening Ukrainian security, but also giving the very important intel to us and ourselves as well. So I would really love to talk about Ukraine defense support. Also, what are you doing? Why? Also, how and what are the plans going forward? Because we see all those drones behind you. When we had our pre-chat, you said there are also Russian drones. You have a complete analysis, you have weekly calls, you have a lot of partners. Can you tell us about it?
First of all, I'll just mention real quick, I won't go through the entire presentation, but I do have an overview of my time in the Ukrainian military, and I would be happy to share that with anyone watching, and talk a little bit about my motivation for going to Ukraine, why, after returning, after spending 6 months there, literally in the trenches, why I'm still so involved, and why I, as a non-Ukrainian, I'm not Slavic, I don't speak Ukrainian, I had never planned to go to Ukraine, nice country, but I had never planned to go there, but why I feel that Ukraine is fighting for our freedom, for America's freedom. I'll just say that if you want to know a little bit more about why I went, I feel that this image from the Daily Mail really does a good job of explaining why I felt morally compelled to go and put my personal freedom and my personal life on the line to help defend the Ukrainian people and frankly defend freedom and life there in Ukraine. So happy to talk more about that when we have time. To get back to your question here, so Ukraine defense support. Yeah, we've got an event coming up here soon. This is our website. We've got a lot of Seattle events, but we've also got a lot of national events. So Ukraine Defense Support is a 501c3 based out of Seattle. We've got 50 active volunteers in Seattle and about a dozen around the country. We've got volunteers in Texas and DC and all around the country. We've raised $1.1 million. This video only says 300,000, but that we haven't updated that yet. We've raised over $1 million, primarily for vehicles, night vision, drones, anti-drone equipment, medical supplies. We've sent containers full of medical supplies. Humvees, we've helped send 12 Humvees. We just loaded the 13th Humvee, this one in a Humvee ambulance, into the container yesterday, actually. That was quite the experience. And so we've done a lot to support Ukraine's defenders. If you go to our website, you play this video here, it talks through, it talks a little bit about the different and the sort of events that we do here in Seattle, and then that we're spawning in Texas and in Florida and in DC. There's a lot of different people working on to support Ukraine. So the reason I bring this up is, hang on, let me get, yeah. So there's some of the equipment that we've sent to Ukraine. The reason I bring this up, what we do differently than any other pro-Ukraine group in the United States, or frankly in the world, is we have a real focus on empowering individual volunteers to get involved. And we have a lot of projects on these three different, if you go to our About Us page, we explain the three different ways that we help Ukraine. In short, they are, we fundraise and buy equipment, we advocate to the US government to better support Ukraine, and we generate public awareness about why it's important for Americans to support Ukraine, like we're doing right now. So those are the three ways that we support Ukraine, and we've got a lot of projects, a lot of different people who are working on different aspects of that. And if anybody watching this is interested in getting involved, please let us know. Go to the website, sign up. Our onboarding team will be in touch with you within 48 hours. We've got a number of private signal chats and Zoom calls. I think last time I checked, we had 14 Zoom calls per week. Don't worry, you won't be invited to all those. But if someone wants to work on advocacy, we've got people working on that. If they want to work on fundraising, or if they want to work on procurement, we've got people testing night vision, testing drones, testing, different drop kits, testing Russian drones. That's a captured Russian drone that was shot down outside of Avdiivka a few months ago. We've got people here in Seattle and in Texas and in California actually going to drone flying events and testing drone detectors and drone jammers. So there's many, many ways to get involved. Oh, we got to update that too. So the website has some information there. If people would like to learn more about the equipment that we provide, we've got some how-to guides on our website about how to buy drones, night vision, vehicles, Humvees. And so we go in depth about how to do this yourself. If people don't want to donate money, they want to buy the items themselves, we lay out the process for how they can do that. And we're happy to help along the way and help them navigate the different legal requirements and shipping requirements. We've got couriers going every week. We've got containers being shipped with vehicles in them. We've got over 2.5 years, we've dialed this in pretty well. So the other allied group that we work with is Defense Tech for Ukraine, and this group is more focused. This group is not providing individual aid to individual units. What this group is doing is trying to increase the quality and quantity of tools in the hands of Ukraine's defenders, with a real focus on drones. And so we work with a lot of Ukrainian drone operators. We've got a 150-person strong community. We've got engineers, manufacturers, both in Ukraine and in America and in Western Europe, allies, fundraisers, investors. We've got 3 regular weekly calls, 2 in English, 1 in Ukrainian. We just had a delegation. I was part of the delegation in Ukraine in October. We spent 2 weeks there. We met with 31 manufacturers in Ukraine, 18 drone manufacturers, and numerous anti-drone manufacturers, solving their problems, connecting them with donors and with investors, connecting them with American manufacturers so that they can skill share and share information. That's a big one. So if anyone would like to get involved and work specifically on defense technology to benefit Ukraine and frankly to benefit America's national security as well, feel free to connect through this website or reach out to me directly. And we'll be happy to plug you into whichever part of this aspect of this project people would be interested in. So that's Defense Tech for Ukraine. So those are the 2 main efforts that we're working on to help Ukraine. We're certainly open to any other ideas that anyone has, and we're all crossing our fingers for January 20th. Hopefully Trump will do the right thing. We'll see. But either way, we're gonna keep doing this work.
Amazing. And thank you so much for sharing. And I want to really direct everyone. You've watched through, you listened through. Now go to ukrainedefensesupport.org and educate yourself. You can become a part of it, whether you're good in talking and sharing information online, or fundraising, or getting into the tech aspect. I know I'm going to share it with my family. They're very eager to learn about that. So, and don't forget to, some people usually say, well, but I don't read in Ukrainian, I read in Russian, because you're from Kharkiv, for instance. Don't forget that whatever website you open, you can Google Translate any of it. Also, Apple Translate on your phone. That's how my dad reads the newsletters, by the way, that I'm sending out every day. You can read in your own language. Please don't forget that we have the tech to do so. So it's not an excuse not to be involved into something that you're interested in because of some language barrier. So reach out to Carl Larson, reach out to me. I'll direct you to Carl and become a part of it. Because you just learned today that this is... if you are all about United States and making America great, I think America is great, so let's skip the again part, or greater, be a part of it. You are improving your own national defense and your security. if you're all about the global issues, that's the biggest global issue right now, which is affecting potential issues in Indo-Pacific and current issues Middle East as well. Everything is very much related if you see it, right? The world is quite small. And Carl, I'm so grateful for your time. I know I overstayed my welcome by far, but I do hope this is first conversation of many. Would love to talk to you come January 20th to get your opinion on what is happening or not happening, because I know from my world of journalism, it's going to be a lot of misinformation on both sides. So we need a voice of reason who knows what exactly is happening, and I would love for you to be one of those very, very important voices.
Well, thank you very much for saying that, Olga. I'm happy to share my perspective and the perspective of the Ukrainian soldiers that we interact with regularly. So I'll just close by saying that, democracy is not a spectator sport. And we Americans are very good. We have a lot of cultural activities and a lot of ways to be distracted. But, history is calling. And this is the most important thing that's happened in the world since the end of the Cold War. I call upon our fellow Americans to get off the couch, put down, turn off the TV, get off the couch, and get involved on the right side of history with the brave Ukrainian people who, frankly, are defending our freedom as well as their own.
Amen to that. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you one more time. And I hope to see you soon. And anything you need on my end, I'm in. Just know it. Thank you.